Imagine you're living in Seoul, the capital of South Korea. You're living in one of the world's most dynamic and technologically advanced economies, but you've hit a rough patch in your life where everything seems to be going wrong. Your job isn't going great, your relationships have hit rock bottom, you're feeling down and out. Wait, am I reading the plot of Squid Game? Sure, you could join Squid Game to try to fix your problems with a bunch of money, but many Koreans will go and visit a manshin, a shaman. This is Lee Kyung-hyun, a 29-year-old Korean shaman who also happens to be a YouTuber with over 300,000 subscribers. She uses social media to connect with her clients, offering consultations about any problem you might be facing, the rising cost of housing or raising children, unemployment, you name it. But she's not offering advice as a life coach, but as someone who can divine the will and presence of the gods and ancestral spirits. Korean shamanism, known as Musok or Mugyo, is a form of popular religion in Korea. According to the anthropologist Laurel Kendall, Korean shamans interact with gods and ancestral spirits. They conduct a variety of small-scale rituals to placate the spirits and sustain their favor, as well as larger-scale rituals to feast and entertain the spirits, to address afflictions, and to secure blessings and prosperity for their clients' households. Korean shamans offer an incredibly diverse array of services to help with the mundane problems of everyday life, calling upon the gods and ancestors to purify, exorcise, heal, and generally bring good fortune. So what is Korean shamanism, and how does it fit within the broader religious landscape of Korea? First, let's talk about shamanism in general. What is it? Shamanism is frequently linked with indigenous religious traditions. It refers to ritual specialists who engage directly with the spirit world, acting as intermediaries to cultivate good relationships with the spirits for the sake of blessings, avoiding misfortune, and maintaining social order. The word itself is a Russian rendering of the word shaman, which stems from the Tungusic language family spoken by the Tungusic people of Siberia. Some argue that the word translates to one who knows. Shaman first appears in English in the 1800s, when Western anthropologists started using the term to refer to a priest or priest-like practitioner among the indigenous peoples of Siberia, though these anthropologists quickly started using the term to refer to ritual specialists in many different indigenous cultures, including in North America. A lot of our modern preconceptions and stereotypes about shamanism can be traced back to this guy, Mircea Eliade, one of the most famous historians of religion. In his 1951 book, Shamanism, Archaic Techniques of Ecstasy, Eliade argued that shamanism is an ancient and universal form of religion using techniques to induce trances that facilitate ecstatic encounters with gods and spirits when their soul leaves their body to travel elsewhere, like to the sky or to the underworld. Eliade asserted that this is how shamans operate all around the world, and he concluded from this supposed universality that shamanism amounts to an original archaic religion that dates back sometime to the Paleolithic period. Now, just like as earlier definitions for animism were overly reductive, you can find a lot of problems with Eliade's emphasis on the supposed universality of world shamanisms. Following Eliade's argument, shamanism becomes a vague term that flattens the whole diversity of indigenous religion into a single, overgeneralized framework. As we'll see later in this video, Korean shamanic practice often diverges from Eliade's criteria for what counts as shamanism. For example, Eliade emphasized ecstatic states, where shamans are either possessed or their souls leave their bodies as the defining feature of shamanism, but there's a lot of debate over to what degree this applies to Korean shamanism. Some forms do focus on possession and ecstasy, other forms don't, and even for the Korean shamanic rituals that are more ecstatic, I saw a lot of debate in the scholarship over what counts as ecstatic trance, with some scholars saying Korean shamanic practice is more like extreme excitement rather than ecstasy, with one scholar saying Korean shamanism generally lacks the dramatic physiological markers associated with trance, like trembling or rolled back eyes. And yeah, I can see why you might be thinking that these debates seem like splitting hairs, but I think it demonstrates that shamanism might not be a useful universal term because it's way too general. Also notice that shamanism is a term invented by Western academics that is applied almost exclusively to non-Western religions. Purposefully or not, this makes shamanism a term that exoticizes or sometimes even romanticizes these traditions. We see this, for example, in how the New Age movement embraced shamanism as an exotic form of non-Western spirituality. But if a shaman is someone who communicates with the spirit world during altered states of consciousness, and it's supposedly a universal phenomenon, why don't we apply the term to a charismatic Christian when the Holy Spirit is thought to fill them and they enter a trance-like state during worship? This is literally an altered state of consciousness in which they're believed to be communing with a spirit, but no one ever calls charismatic Christianity a form of shamanism. So shamanism as a category is less about defining a universal religious phenomenon and more about how Western academics have chosen to describe certain non-Western religious practices, often inconsistently and often with an exoticizing or romanticizing lens. It's more of a scholarly construct than a descriptive term referring to a type of religious practice. However, for better or for worse, scholars and English-speaking practitioners still use the term Korean shamanism, even if only in their book titles, to refer to a diverse form of popular religious practice indigenous to the Korean peninsula that involves mediating with or interacting with the spirit world. To use the Korean terminology, though, these practices are called Musok or Mugyo. And to be even more technical, Musok is shamanic practice, while Mugyo can mean shamanism or teachings of shamans. However, as we'll see later, even these terms are complicated by a history of stigma and colonial domination. The terms Musok and Mudong, the colloquial term for shaman, are loaded words and often derogatory words that have as much to do with cultural politics as they do with shamanic practices. Alright, moving on. Gotta love a terminology section. At its most basic level, Musok is all about specialists acting as intermediaries engaging with gods and ancestral spirits, or Shin and Josang respectively, though the word Shin can colloquially refer to both ancestral spirits and gods. Korean popular religion features a rich pantheon of gods associated with day-to-day concerns. There are guardian deities of the home, such as Jowangshin, goddess of the hearth, childbirth goddesses like Samshin Halmoni, gods of diseases and their cures, deities of fertility and longevity like the seven-star deities, commonly known in the US as the Big Dipper, as well as gods of nature like mountain gods. There are also gods from the other religious traditions of Asia, like Buddhism, Taoism, and Chinese popular religion. The Jade Emperor, the deified spirit of the ancient Chinese general Guan Yu, all localized in the Korean religious landscape. This barely scratches the surface though. By one count, there are 134 different shamanic deities, and this is by no means a final count. New spirits can be added. Shamans in and around the city of Incheon communicate with the spirit of General Douglas MacArthur, who led a successful amphibious invasion of the city during the Korean War, turning the tide of the war against the North Korean army. Many shamans in and around Incheon display the American flag in their ritual space, and even use the American flag as part of their rituals to communicate with his spirit. One shaman in this study said that the spirit of General MacArthur likes to give divinations using South Korea's national flag, and so this shaman has added this flag to their repertoire along with the customary 5 colored flags used in shamanic divination. Case in point, the specific identities of gods often depend on individual shamans' interpretations and the interpretations of their respective communities. But in general, Korean shamanism views the gods and spirits as constantly active agents in everyday life. Supernatural agents that can be angered, placated, bargained with, and more, all with the help of an intermediary, the shaman. So let's talk about the shamans. There are an estimated 200,000 shamans in Korea, with some estimates as high as 400,000. In Korean, the general term for these practitioners is mudong, but this term can often be derogatory, and it covers up the diversity of shamans we see across Korea. South Korea is not a huge country. It's about the size of the US state of Pennsylvania, but thanks to the mountainous terrain and many surrounding islands, it's developed an impressively diverse range of shamanic traditions. These differences aren't just about local pantheons, they also show up in the unique ways shamanic rituals are practiced across the country. So, for example, scholars typically differentiate between 2 types of shamans in Korea. Even though Eliade said that ecstasy is the defining feature of shamanism, this varies from region to region. Some forms of Korean shamanism emphasize ecstasy and spirit possession, and others don't so much. Northern-style shamans tend to enter the profession by being called by a deity, which involves experiencing shinbyong, spirit sickness. Those experiencing spirit sickness suffer from symptoms like pain, hallucinations, recurring dreams, or emotional distress, though not all practitioners describe shinbyong as traumatic. From a shamanic perspective, this condition is caused by spirits demanding that the afflicted person accept their role as an intermediary. It's a transformative process where the person is believed to negotiate with the spirit through rituals, ultimately leading to their initiation as a manchin, the term for a female shaman, or a baksu, the term for a male shaman. The vast majority of these practitioners are women, so manchin often appears in scholarship as a general term referring to these spirit-possessed intermediaries. Manchin literally means 10,000 spirits, a reference to the notion that spirits have taken hold of these individuals. The scholar Lior Sarfati calls them God-descended mediators. After being called via spirit sickness, and after being initiated, manchin undergo training to learn the rituals, learning how to recognize deities, going on mountain pilgrimages, and generally mastering the art of, well, being a master of the spirits. By contrast, shamans in the southern part of the Korean peninsula and Jeju Island off the southern coast of Korea enter their trade not through spirit sickness, but through a hereditary lineage and rigorous training as a seisamu, a lineage shaman, or a shimbang, which is a specific local term for Jeju Island shamans. Given the stronger focus on possession in Northern-style practice, ritual performances called gut involve a variety of spirits coming in and out of the performances. As the anthropologist Laurel Kendall says, Manchin use their bodies to indicate the presence of spirits. They change their voice, they change their temperament, they'll change their costume multiple times during a ritual, and they'll perform extraordinary feats that are thought to indicate that a god or spirit is present. For example, a shaman channeling a warrior deity might mount barefoot onto sharp blades as part of the theatrical Jakdu Tagi ceremony. These rituals are full-body manifestations of the spirits and can be very colorful and performative, involving song, percussive music, dance, wielding weaponry, piles of food offerings, and sharing sacred stories. A gut is performed for various reasons, ranging from seeking healing for physical or emotional ailments, to ensuring good fortune, resolving family conflicts, or appeasing restless spirits. Though no matter the occasion, the point of the ritual is to make the spirit manifest in the here and now. While many Southern-style rituals do involve possession, they're often less frequent, dramatic, and energetic compared to their Northern-style practices. That said, these are generalizations. There are always exceptions both in Northern and Southern-style practice. Over time, especially with Korea's rapid modernization in the 20th century, the lines between Northern and Southern style have blurred quite a bit. Northern-style rituals in particular have had a big influence as village shamans have declined and more people have moved to the cities. Aside from these large-scale rituals, shamans also offer clients smaller-scale rituals that deal with everyday problems. According to reporting by Reuters in 2024, shamans can charge around $73 in today's currency for a consultation for between 30 and 60 minutes. Among the many services they offer, shamans can provide guidance on relationships or job searches or predictions about the future. You can spot a shaman's shop by its signature bamboo pole bearing a flag or Buddhist symbols. Or you might head out of the city and find an outdoor shrine with a shaman in charge. These shops, known as Gutdong and Shindong, are ritual spaces where shamans provide traditional Korean holistic care. On the Korean peninsula, Gutdong are ritual venues for shamanic services, sort of like pop-up private practices, while Shindong are village shrines embedded into natural formations. Traditional Korean shamanic shrines often center on special trees, striking natural land formations such as unusual rocks or crafted objects. But practitioners don't necessarily believe that landscapes embody deities, or that spirits always literally inhabit these spaces. Rather, they're thought of as points of contact for communicating with spirits who must be summoned to the shrine through rituals, prayers, and offerings. For example, a rite called Seongju Puri in Jeju Island is an example of this animating practice, in which a shaman is called to consecrate a new building or new business by summoning household deities to it. So how does shamanism fit into the broader Korean religious landscape? Korea is very religiously diverse. There's a huge Christian population, it has a long history of Buddhism, Confucianism, and Taoism, but Musok, as a popular form of religion, doesn't really fit neatly into any specific tradition, though there is a long history of Buddhism and Korean shamanism influencing each other. And to the casual observer, it's often hard to differentiate between what is specifically Buddhist and what is specifically related to Korean shamanism. You'll often see different kinds of Buddhist ritual spaces in Korea, but then you'll also come across shops and shrines that seem Buddhist at first glance, but then you spot that colorful cloth tied to a pole or tree. That's a key indicator, marking the place as a shamanic ritual goods shop. These shops are often located near urban Buddhist temples and even advertise themselves as Buddhist, but they're not actually part of the official Buddhist temple practices. If you look closer, you'll find things like devotional candles dedicated to personal deities and even shamans' costumes. Many Manchin call themselves posol, meaning bodhisattva, which in Mahayana Buddhism refers to beings who commit to developing the deep desire to achieve enlightenment not just for themselves, but to help all other beings, aiming ultimately to become a Buddha. In Korea, posol can also refer to women who live and work at monasteries as laypeople, but again, this terminology is adapted from Buddhist practice without involving actual service to a Buddhist temple or monastery. This is why Korean shamanism is a form of popular religion. I've also seen it called vernacular religion, because it operates outside the framework of institutionalized religions, blending and borrowing elements from established religions like Buddhism while remaining deeply rooted in the everyday needs and practices of ordinary people. Even Korean Christians are known to visit shamans, despite Korean Christian leaders often speaking out against it. As one shaman puts it, even churchgoers want to have their bad dreams read. But why the stigma? The contemporary nuances of the terms Musok and Mugyo were developed only in the 20th century to categorize all Korean indigenous spiritual and ritual practices as a single religion under the same title, Shamanism. Prior to this era, Confucian scholars during the Joseon dynasty, which ruled the Korean peninsula from 1392 to 1910, simply denigrated shamans and local beliefs as folk superstitions, contrasting them from what they regarded as correct Confucian-inspired patriarchal family rituals. Later in the 19th century, European and American Christian missionaries devised a notion of Korean shamanism as a distinct religion and a subject of academic study to better adjust their proselytizing efforts to the Korean context. The English explorer and writer Isabella Bird Bishop described Korean shamanic practice in prejudicial terms, describing them as engaging with demons that touch the Korean at every point in life, making his well-being depend on a continual series of acts of propitiation, and avenge every omission with merciless severity, keeping him under his yoke of bondage from birth to death. From 1910 to 1945, Korea was under Japanese colonial rule, and Japanese authorities and academics were equally disparaging as they pinpointed Korean shamanism as one of several allegedly primitive practices, alleging that these practices are proof of Koreans' cultural immaturity and inferiority compared to Japan. The term Musok was actually coined during this colonial period, referring to shamanic practices that the Japanese colonial government defined as superstitious and primitive. Ironically, Korean nationalist thinkers ended up adopting these ideas from foreign missionaries and Japanese intellectuals, ideas that were often meant to insult Korean religion as primitive, but they flipped the script, using those same notions to argue that Koreans were actually more ancient and more culturally pure than their Japanese colonial rulers. Citing the myth of the demigod Dongun, who is said to have founded the first Korean state in 2333 BCE, the colonial-era cultural nationalist Choi Namsun argued that Korean mythology proved that Korean shamanism was a precious, eternal, and our oldest held belief. And he took it a step further, claiming that the myth's supposed antiquity demonstrated that Korean shamanic culture was the foundation of all East Asian culture. In the 60s and 70s, shamans were also persecuted under anti-superstition campaigns during the rule of Park Chung-hee. When it was labeled as immoral and manipulative, hundreds of shrines were destroyed and shamans were arrested, sometimes accused of fraud for charging for their services. Even though the official crackdown ended with Park Chung-hee's assassination in 1979, negative stigma surrounding shamanism lingers to this day and will often get bad press, like when a shaman in Seoul was convicted of defrauding a client of $200,000, or shamanism's alleged role in a corruption scandal in 2016 involving Chae Soon-sil, a close confidant of then-President Park Geun-hye. Chae Soon-sil, despite having no official government position, was accused of using her relationship with the president to influence state affairs. This led to public outrage, massive protests, and ultimately resulted in the impeachment and removal of the president. Chae Soon-sil was the daughter of a leader of a new religious movement called the Church of Eternal Life, and she was accused of being a shaman for the movement. This led to a moral panic against shamanism, with many viewing it as a national embarrassment. Practicing Manchin were offended and vehemently protested, saying that the scandal was unfairly tainting their reputation. But in recent years, there's evidence that Korean shamanism is shaking off the stigma, especially in entertainment media and social media. Today, Korean shamanism is most readily visible at public festivals and in mass media, where it's often celebrated as an aspect of Korean culture. Starting in the 1980s, after years of suppression under military dictatorship, there was a real desire to reconnect with Korea's cultural roots. This was fueled in part by movements at the time which emphasized the value of folk traditions. Musok was promoted as an ancient and authentically indigenous Korean practice. This newfound appreciation led to its inclusion in the government's Intangible National Heritage Program, essentially giving it official recognition and support. Mass media is also playing a key role in mainstreaming Korean shamanism. For example, the mystery rom-com Cafe Minamdong on Netflix is a lighthearted take on Musok. It features a sexy shamanic detective who divines the future to solve crimes, sometimes even using recognizable shamanic tools like bells, which are believed to attract spirits. The hit horror movie Exuma, released in 2024, tackles the subject with a more serious tone. It follows a renowned Korean shaman who is hired by a wealthy family to investigate a mysterious illness afflicting their baby. Without spoiling too much, the film wrestles with heavy themes of spiritual resistance and cultural identity during the Japanese colonial period, a time when shamanic practices were denigrated. The actress who plays the main shaman studied with actual Manchin to accurately portray the rituals on screen, particularly during an intense scene when she performs an exorcism ritual at the family grave. Now, don't get me wrong, of course negative stereotypes still linger, but the fact that a shaman can now be a main character hero suggests a positive vibe shift in the public. Which brings us back to the Manchin and YouTuber Lee Kyung-hyun. Ever since she was a teenager, she experienced what she believed to be spirit sickness. In 2018, she finally embraced her calling as a Manshin and began posting videos to her channel in the following year. She's noticed a growing trend of other shamans doing the same, positioning themselves as social media influencers. And Google Trends has shown that searches on YouTube for shaman have doubled over the past 5 years. According to an interview with Reuters, she connects this trend to contemporary economic anxieties, like the rising cost of housing and raising kids, which are pushing millennial and Gen Z Koreans to seek spiritual support. Despite past stigma associated with shamanism, Lee, like other contemporary practitioners, is publicly open about her practice and sees her role as a spiritual guide offering advice. This follows recent research that suggests that many urban Manshin have evolved into what we might call cosmopolitan entrepreneurs. They're not just performing traditional rituals, they're offering spiritual services and guidance tailored to the needs of a younger professional demographic. So while traditional village-based shamanism is on the decline, we're seeing an evolution of Korean shamanism from a communal, localized religious practice into something much more individualized, evolving into a personalized spirituality, responding to the very real stresses of urban life in contemporary Korea. Korean shamanism has also adapted to changing political realities. Take, for example, Paektu Mountain, the most sacred mountain for Korean shamans. It's believed to be the source of Korea's geomantic energy and the birthplace of the demigod Dongun, the legendary founder of Korea. But there's a geopolitical catch. It's located on the border of China and North Korea. It was cut off for much of the 20th century due to Cold War divisions. Then finally in the 1990s, South Korean shamans began making pilgrimages to Paektu Mountain, but from the Chinese side, as China opened its doors to South Korean tourism and trade, and has since transformed into a site where religion, national identity, and geopolitics intersect. Some shamans have even performed shamanic rituals at the mountain, invoking spirits to bless the Korean people and pray for national reunification between North and South Korea. These rituals have inspired other shamans to make similar journeys, with some reporting seeing visions of spirits from both North and South Korea uniting in the heavens. Now, if you're interested in the complicated political dynamics of the Korean Peninsula, then I really recommend you check out War Room, a series from the creator Real Life Lore. This series delivers in-depth monthly updates on ongoing global conflicts, including recent episodes on the impeachment crisis in South Korea and North Korea's troop deployment to aid Russia's invasion of Ukraine. It's a great way to keep you up to date on what's happening around the world and why. And you can watch it exclusively on Nebula. If you've been watching Religion for Breakfast for a while, you've probably heard me talk about Nebula. It's a streaming platform built by and for independent creators, myself included. It's a place where you can watch high-quality videos from people who care a lot about making thoughtful content. It's also home to exclusive series you won't find anywhere else, what we call Nebula Originals, shows made just for Nebula by some of the smartest creators out there. If you're into human evolution, Becoming Human by Real Science is an incredible journey through key moments in our evolutionary history, like how we developed the ability to speak. And if archaeology is more your thing, Archaeology Quest follows two creators as they attempt to survive in the Paleolithic era, learning firsthand how to make stone tools, forage for food, and even master ancient weapons. These are the kind of ambitious projects that Nebula makes possible, and because it's a creator-owned platform, by subscribing, you're directly supporting the people that make this content. If you sign up using my link nebula.tv/religionforbreakfast, you'll get 40% off an annual subscription, which comes out to be just $36 a year or $3 a month. Or if you're tired of monthly subscriptions, Nebula also offers a lifetime membership for $300. Pay once and get access forever. Again, that's nebula.tv/religionforbreakfast. Thanks everyone.